And linked to this, I would like to invite you, our guest speaker, Peter Looker. He's from the EON team, and I've engaged with Peter for some time now. And soon I will be inviting Peter to engage in workshops with us to start sharing these AR, VR technologies with the staff. Welcome, Peter. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Juliet. It's great to be here, and thank you for the invitation to come today. I've been here for about 5 or 6 of the papers, and it's been really interesting. It makes me feel as if I miss being in a university, to be honest. So just a little bit about me. I've got a rather crooked sort of career. I started out as an academic teaching English literature at the University of New South Wales, where I was for 20 years, but I jumped over into learning and teaching development. So I'm one of those people who ran courses like the one Nigel was talking about earlier on for many years at a number of universities, most recently at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, where I was the Director of Teaching and Learning until the beginning of this year. And now I'm the Chief Learning Officer for EON. Very quickly, I want to talk about these things, although I feel after Simone's talk that I really don't need to talk about a lot of this stuff because she's covered it so well. Why AVR has often been limited in its use, how EON XR overcomes the problems, real-world problem solving, which has come up several times already, student self-directed learning. This is really the part of my presentation that I most want to get to. We believe that one of the best ways of using the EON XR platform is for students to be actively engaged in building the lessons rather than being the consumers of the lessons on the made by teachers. A little bit about remote and multi-user, and if time allows, though I don't think it will, I'd like to show some examples. One of the problems, as actually has come up in the survey that Simone has just talked about, and I found that really interesting, is that as it exists, there's been a lot of problems with wide usage of AVR, augmented and virtual reality in universities, despite the fact that we know that it's very useful. And that's got to do with things like the hardware being too expensive and not convenient. It's got to do with a lack of an easy way to create new content for end users and a lack of availability and access. So I've been to a lot of universities where they're developing augmented and virtual reality, but they're often developing it from the ground up. It's very niche. It only applies to a few subjects. It requires carrying headsets around to different classrooms and all of this kind of stuff. And EON has tried to get rid of all of that. How? I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure how that slide got there. It's not meant to be there. So one of the things that we've done is to create a platform. So the platform becomes almost like a kind of clearinghouse, if you like. The platform sits on the cloud, and you've already had a look at it before. Simone actually showed you the sign-in page before. You go into that, and then what happens is that you can bring in 3D models, whether it's from the EON library itself or from elsewhere, 3D immersive environments, 360 photos. They are really easy to bring in. You don't need any coding knowledge. You don't need any advanced technological knowledge in order to do it. You bring those in, and then what you do with those is to provide information of all kinds. You do screen recordings, you create activities for the users, various activities. You can include videos, you can include quizzes, you can annotate the models or the 360 photos and so on. And then once created, and you only have to create the lesson once in that way, you have mass distribution, you have you can use it on any Wi-Fi connected device without any kind of re-editing or reformatting or anything like that. It's all, so if you create it on a desktop, for example, it's already available on mobile devices and on headsets, but on mobile devices, it will play in 3 different modes as well. And you don't actually have to change anything to make that happen. So it's multimodal AR and VR, which includes, you saw, for example, before the skeleton of a person being placed in the room. That's the kind of thing that you can do with your phone once the lesson has been created. So it's really the most important part about the EON solution is this platform that enables you as a teacher or enables students very easily to create lessons. The 3D models, immersive environments, and 360 photos quite literally can be dragged and dropped in. You don't have to do anything else. Now, I'm going to skip through this because I think you kind of know this stuff, really. You know, it's come up so many times. One of the things that's happened to me in my progress from in universities over 35 years is I've moved from a very traditional teacher back in the 1980s to understand that the way that I used to teach was wrong. That's all there is to it. It was wrong. It wasn't even suitable for the times. It was just ignorance. We didn't know in those days, and I think we've got much better research now on how people learn. And one of the things that we know is that learning is much better done through activity, as Shahid was talking about before. So, you know, the evidence is increasing for the better kind of learning transfer that can occur and the better problem solving that can occur when students are more actively engaged in their learning, but even physically engaged. I know this is only one study, but it's an important one, I think, from coming out of Copenhagen last year, University of Copenhagen, that is comparing several groups of students. And the reason that it's important is not so much, well, partly for the outcome of the experiment, but also for the recognition about the nature of research that comes out of it. So they compared 3 groups, these 3 groups: desktop VR stimulation, immersive VR simulation, and conventional safety manual for students learning lab safety. Now, a lot of previous educational researchers made the mistake of actually comparing things with what went before to see if the new technology just does it a bit better. What they say is that we know that these 3 groups are still going to perform the same in terms of factual knowledge. So the immersive VR simulation, desktop VR simulation doesn't make any difference to their factual knowledge. Where it does vary, however, is when you measure something different. So when the students were put into laboratories in a high-stakes real context where they did have to solve problems, the immersive VR students significantly outperformed the other groups. The desktop VR students outperformed the students who had used the lab manual. So what they're really saying in this is, be careful what you're measuring. Don't just measure against the old measures. Don't just judge it against the old measures. Look at what it can do that is actually different. And in this case, that conclusion was that it leads to better transfer of knowledge to the real world and better problem solving. Now, I want to go on to self-directed learning. This is one of the things that we talk about a lot now with universities and which is being put into practice. Okay, so you've got the EON XR platform. Now, what most people think to begin with is, okay, this is for me as a teacher to create an activity-based lesson for a student. So I take a model or an immersive environment or 360 photos. I create a lesson from that with activities. The students have to work through it. They might have to look at some videos. They might have to pull this thing apart, put it back together. They might have to answer some quizzes, etc., etc. But what we think is that actually this is for the students to do. And there's one university now which we're using as a kind of incubator, where 163 courses, this is in Kosovo, University of Business and Technology, and in 163 courses, the students are creating the lessons, and those lessons become assignments. So basically what happens is the lecturer will say to them something like, and I'm giving one example, will say something like, use the AVR platform, use the EON XR platform to show how blood gets around the body, right? Problem. It's expressed in a kind of problem-based way. The student then has to find a model, and there are plenty to choose from. If not, there may be some supplied, to choose, and then to construct a lesson. So what happens? Let's suppose you take a lesson like this on the animal cell. So here's a model of an animal cell. Now, unfortunately, because I don't have very much time, I can't show you this live. So I'm only showing you static pictures. If I was showing it you live, I could manipulate this model, I could turn it around, I could X-ray it, I could pull it apart, and so on, but I'm not going to do that. So here's the animal cell. Now, when you go into the lesson, this is what it might look like. And again, you can manipulate this, you can enlarge it, you can pull it apart, and all of those sorts of things. But what you will see are, there'll be some labeling, and there'll be an introduction. So if this were live, I'd be able to press this and there'd be a voice introduction, and then there's a video attached here. So if I click here, I'll go into a video. Now, if you're a student and you're asked to build something about an animal cell, think about it this way. They've got the model, but you've taken all the labels off. There are no labels. The student might have to label it. In other words, do some research to be able to do that. Then create an introduction, which becomes a voice introduction. They can either record that themselves or they can do a text-to-speech. They will have to go and search for suitable videos, and having done this many times myself, and knowing that there's a lot of rubbish out there, in order to get decent videos, you've got to use some discrimination. Let's go to the next slide, because what happens is if you click on here in the lesson, you'll get this kind of program of activities coming up. Now, you're only seeing a few here, but if I was to scroll up on this, you'd see that there were, in fact, 24 or so activities, which include pulling it apart, analysing parts, doing quizzes, and all of these voice memos, even though you can't see it here, actually have videos attached. So this lesson is very rich. And you imagine that you give this to a student, they can do it easily. Using this platform is as easy as using PowerPoint for anybody. You don't need any special knowledge to do it. And so you imagine you give this to a student and you ask them to construct this lesson, all right? So what I think is that this plays into what we now know a lot about the size effects of different learning and teaching activities. I'm sure many of you know this book. It's become one of the most well-known books on education since it came out in 2009 by John Hattie, and it is literally a synthesis of 50,000 or so individual studies on size effects. In other words, what kinds of things have the biggest or smallest effects on student teaching? And I've been lucky enough to work with John over the last 6 years on a grant selection panel, and I've talked to him a lot because before I met him, this was one of my favourite books. And one of the things that he says quite sensibly, I think, is that almost anything will have an effect on student learning, but some things have a very tiny effect and some things have a very large effect. And many of the things that we do in traditional teaching have a very small effect, but there are certain things that have a large effect. Now, those that have a large effect, he says, are, and I think that, you know, those of you who are involved in teaching and learning development should be very heartened by this conclusion, that when teachers become learners of their own teaching, which is exactly what all of you are doing by presenting in this colloquium, when teachers become learners of their own teaching, and when students become their own teachers. When students become their own teachers. So that combination of things is where he says by far the largest effects on student learning occur, which is why we emphasize this self-directed learning. So what happens if you're using the platform, with students using the platform? When they're constructing a lesson on the Eon XR platform, they need to do research. We all want students to learn how to do research and to do more of it. They need to do research in order to be able to bring the information into the lesson. They need to be able to do research to bring videos into the lesson as well. They need to be able to make judgments about that, because ultimately what you're going to do with this, and this is an important point, is you're going to get the students to share these with each other, to make judgments, communicate to their peers, and most important, I think, is to create coherence in the subject matter. So in order for them to produce the kind of lesson that I've shown you, they actually have to produce something coherent, but with all the advantages of doing it so that it's three-dimensional. It's possible to manipulate it, to pull it apart, and so on. As a consequence, Eon Reality has created a couple of guides. There's a guide for students to build lessons, and there's a guide for faculty and teachers in building lessons and also supporting students to build lessons. These guides are really meant to be guides coming from us, but they do come from a pedagogical perspective. And in it, you will find a template for designing a lesson, which asks them to think about learning outcomes. There's a guide to writing learning outcomes. Now, I've been working on developing learning outcomes for whole universities for a long time. And I've often run a PhD course where I get students to write learning outcomes, and even undergraduates. And one of the things that I find is that undergraduates and PhD students are very often better at writing learning outcomes than teachers are. So they have to plan the lesson and so on. Then we have a process for building the lesson. So they plan it, they use the planning template, they develop learning outcomes and outline the activities they'll use and why. They do research for the memos and the videos. They create lessons by paying attention to quantitative and qualitative criteria, which are included in the guide. And then they share and evaluate the lessons. That's a very important part of the whole process. And one of the ways in which they can share those lessons is through multi-user remote function of the platform. In case I don't get to this bit at the end, I want to say this now because it's important. The Eon XR platform actually allows up to 50 people to be all in different places, in remote places, with their phones or mobile devices only, and they can all be occupying the same virtual space. So this thing that you see on the right-hand side of the screen, they could all be in that space together, and they can be talking to each other, they can be manipulating the object, they can be pointing things out to each other, and an instructor can take charge of it if she or he wants as well. These are the kinds of criteria that we have for the students for building the lessons. We think that the overarching ideas are coherence, structure, variety, time on task. Like I say, this is just a guide. If I were a teacher myself, I'd be taking this and adapting it to different things, but we're showing this as a way of suggesting how a good lesson might appear if you were using the platform well and creating something rich. We also have quantitative criteria. And again, this is a guideline suggesting that a good lesson has a rich number of different kinds of activities, so that it's producing a sort of multimedia effect in terms of learning. At the top there, what you see are some suggestions for sequences. I'm very big on the idea of creating meaningful sequences of learning where one activity informs the other. And I've got an analysis in the guides that I showed you before of what it might look like if you were creating a sequence of activities where the activities built on one another and meant something. So there's, as I said, there's this multi-user function. Now, what you can see here is only 2 screens, but if I just have a go at playing a little bit of this, and I'm going to push it forward a bit because
my name's John.
My colleague John did this, but what I want to show you is a little bit further along.
Hit submit.
So what happens here is that you can allow people to go into the, up to 50 users perhaps, to go into it by giving them the code. They just put in the code and they sign in, and then they can all share in the same space. Whoops, I didn't mean that to happen there. Let me see if I can just get this. Here, okay. So what you can see here is 2 people who are in exactly the same space. Now, you can have 50 students all at home with their mobile phones, and they'll all be there in the same space. And each of them can take turns in actually talking about it and demonstrating and manipulating the models. I'll just perhaps stop that there if I can.
Likewise, if you...
And here's another example of where this is being done with what's called markerless augmented reality. So that what you can see here is it's the same thing. 2 people are actually using their mobile devices, but they've enlarged, they've scaled the model up, and the model is now being shown projected onto a lawn. Just kill the music there. So if we move ahead, okay, so now the model has been put onto the lawn. It'll be scaled up, and Vaibhav is the person who's actually taking the lead at the moment. So the others who are in here are seeing what he's pointing at. So everybody's seeing the same thing. So again, you could have 50 students and they're all watching him. He could be talking and giving a lecture if that's what you want to do. Okay. How am I going for time? Can anyone tell me?
Peter, your
Yes.
time's actually up, but you can finish, Peter. You're the last speaker, so yeah, because...
Oh, okay, thanks, Juliet. Thanks very much. Okay, so look, folks, all I wanted to do now was I mean, that's the finish of the things basic that I wanted to show, but I did want to give you a couple of examples. One of the things I think it's important for me to be able to say is that this platform can do a lot of different things, but very, very easily. It's the ease with which it can be done and the ease with which students can use it. One of the things that really heartens me about it is that right at the moment, we're talking to an organisation in Mali about using this platform for Malian farmers to help them with their crops. And what's going to happen is they'll do all of this work on their mobile phones. So there's all the stuff's going to be on mobile phones and they'll be able to access it in that way. So what you're seeing in front of you now is somebody's mobile device, and you're seeing a digital twin of an electronic board. Now, I have to add that this is a recording of a lesson. It's not the actual lesson itself. So you're only seeing snapshots of it. And the other thing about that is that the resolution is very poor because there's a certain degree of lag involved in the recording. So while it looks a bit, it doesn't look like the best quality in the video, that's not how it would look if it were actually a live lesson. So what you see here is something that I think has fairly obvious advantages, and that is that the student is going to project a digital twin that is here. This is the augmented reality electronic board onto the desk in front of him. And you can all do this really easily. All you need to do is to basically press a button and point it at a flat surface, and that's what happens. So you get this. You can scale it, look at it close, and then in a minute you'll see his hand coming in, and the real electronic board here. So now he can put the real electronic board, because the camera in his phone, of course, is pointing to this, and he can compare the two things. So I think, that's something that people might be interested in. Now, another version of the same thing is in this one. It's the same kind of effect where the plastic injection molding machine is actually being projected again from a phone onto the floor in the factory, in a workshop. But the important thing, I think, here is the scaling up. So what you can see here is how the model can actually end up looking as if it belongs in the workshop itself. So here's the workshop. And now he's going to project it onto the workshop floor. Now he's scaling it up, and you can see that it looks very much as if it belongs in the workshop itself. Now, you can do that with immersive environments where you can actually walk into them. I haven't included an example of that, but one of the lessons that I made myself was of the Colosseum in Rome, and I went out and projected the Colosseum onto the courtyard of my apartment building, and I walked around inside the Colosseum full size. So that's something you can do as well. Now, here's a medical one that we produced for, and I don't have many more left, so I'll finish in a minute. This is a medical one that we produced for a hospital, a children's hospital in America, in California, and it's to teach nurses IV placement. Ultimately, what we did was to create a model where you can superimpose the veins over the top of a real arm. So just have a look at this. Again, this is all done, on somebody's phone. Actually, I might play the sound here.
Intravenous therapy is an effective and fast-acting.
First, you will need to find the vein. You should visualize for the vein, or you can palpate and feel a bouncy tube. Sometimes you will need to place the tourniquet as your first step to help find the veins and fill them with blood to make it easier to visualize. Next.
Now, here is what you're seeing here is that model superimposed over somebody's arm. So the request was because they want to be able to train nurses in terms of IV, peripheral IV, and they want to be able to do some of that training without the nurses having to come to the hospital, and so that they can be prepared for when they actually have to do it. This is an increasing kind of thing that we're finding. Now, I want to show you something else, because I think this, for those in the humanities like me, this is a particularly interesting form of using the platform. I'm currently working through a number of World Heritage sites and 360 photos. This is Castel del Monte in Italy, and here I've got 4 different 360 photos all pulled into the same part of the platform. So it's a single lesson, and you can see what happens. So you create a 360 set of photos, and then you create a lesson
Castel
around
del Monte, Italian for Castle of the Mount, was built by the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II.
So each of these has notes attached to it and videos.
The shape has an astrological connection.
It's got quizzes.
This is a statue of Frederick II, the Holy Roman Emperor. And though Frederick II was a crusader, he tried...
So, okay, so you can do this for history, or you could probably do it for tourism if you wanted to as well, but you can also do it for things like field trips. So here in Singapore, some people in environmental science are actually going to use this now for students going on field trips. So what happens is the students will take 360 photos with a relatively cheap 360 camera. They can upload those as easily as they can upload them to Instagram. And then they can put those together. The students can then annotate them, describe what it is that they've seen. They can attach videos if they want, and so on. So this is another form of students making lessons. Okay, that's it. That's all I've got. And I'm sorry for going a little bit over time, but I hope that was of some interest to those of you who might be using the platform in the future.
Thank you, Peter. Fantastic. It was a nice way to end our day. So thank you very much, and thank you for taking the time, Peter, to join us from across the globe. And looking forward to working with you. As you can see, Peter, like you and I discussed, we don't have to convince our academics anymore around the use of technologies. You know, we have 95% of them on board already. So this would just be the next level. And at the same time, Peter, as we highlighted yesterday, we cater for those that can't even use a computer, you know, or we come from diverse backgrounds. So we will continue learning, all of us, and yes, stay trendy, and most of all, think about the student. I've shared an email also with the staff, Peter, around at least just the first phase, the library, and the form they need to fill in so that Ian can give them access. I see Lauren was in our group as well. So we're working with Larry's office also around that. But thank you very much.
Great. I look forward to working with you all.
Thank you so much. Yes, there's Lauren. Thank you so much. Okay, colleagues, thank you for staying with us. It was really great, and I can't thank you all enough for everything you do around emerging technologies, and especially for your students. And good luck, stay healthy and take care. We will continue, and